All right, a brief continuation of this conversation. Carol Lee, chime in. We're debating due process slash transparent workplace slash politics bringing down sometimes good people who don't get a fair chance.
Yeah, what I was thinking about as I was listening to you all talk is, you know, you have the country's top elected officials who had an opportunity, essentially, with Al Franken to set an example and lead to the country in this debate that everybody is having by perhaps implementing some sort of policy allowing this to go through some sort of due process to answer all of these very tough questions. And instead, what you saw is the country's leadership essentially make a very politically expedient decision, now having some sort of buyer's remorse. And now the result of that is nobody else has any sort of direction on how some of the country's top officials might suggest people handle these tough questions, and you're going to see more and more people come out and facing allegations, and there's no process. And so it seems like a huge missed opportunity here.
And I think that the conversation should have been extended. There should have been due process in this case, especially in light of Kirsten Gillibrand, who really was on the forefront of this effort with Al Franken. And it just unfortunately sets her up for a lot of criticism since she worked for so many years alongside and within the Clinton bubble and in support of Hillary Clinton and getting support from Bill Clinton, who she now conveniently says should have stepped down for sexually harassing an intern in the White House, among other things. It all just seems political. It all seems kind of dirty and hypocritical, instead of an opportunity to really shine the light on perhaps some behaviors that might have been accepted even 5 years ago that we no longer accept today. That would have been a great conversation, and we were not able to have it.
Carol Lee.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And, you know, you can't help, and this is what people in the country can't stand, right? You have the Democrats who come out and they say, you know, Al Franken has to resign, and there's this drumbeat that builds up, and now everyone's like, oh, you know, maybe they shouldn't have had to resign, and there's this buyer's remorse, and it's this like, what do you stand for? What's your position? What do you stand for? And if anything, I think people appreciate somebody who has a conviction and sticks with what their position is. And what you're seeing now is this sort of wishy-washy, flip-floppy, and out of that is no leadership. You can't see where the leadership is here.
Yeah, and we get to pick and choose our leaders. Apparently Bill Clinton, what he did wasn't as bad because he's Bill Clinton. Yeah, well, Mika,
the things that you'd like to see implemented and have been talking about for quite some time are all necessary. But this is a national discussion. It's not a debate. And it involves far more than people like Al Franken or Bill Clinton or Kirsten Gillibrand. It involves school teachers and waitresses and nurses. It involves women who feel threatened, coerced, or pressured or intimidated, sometimes on their job sites. That ought not to be, and we should have a national discussion about it. And we are having a national discussion about it, and hopefully improvements will come quickly. They're long overdue. But when you've reached an initial stage in this early part of the discussion where the mere mention of your name as a guy in a paper linked to sexual harassment means the end of your career, the end of your income opportunities, and in essence, the end of a critical part of your life, we've got to stop and wonder, look, okay, what are we doing here? We've got to, as a news business, begin to separate the Harvey Weinsteins from, you know, people accused.
The Glenn Thrushes.
Yes, exactly right. Thank you.
Yeah, hey, so, Mika,
that's a bad date, Glenn Thrush.
You know, this weekend, Mika, you had talked about, you'd said that you had been to a couple of events. Yeah. And you had men and women saying things that they all say, or a lot of them say off the camera. I'm talking about leaders in business and a lot of other areas.
The top.
And it reminded me, what you just said, reminded me of what Chris Hayes tweeted last night, which was, for everybody that thinks there's a huge disconnect between what people say on Twitter and what they say out here in the real world, this discussion is one of the greatest examples of that. Because on Twitter, it's all
very ugly.
It's all get the torches, and it's shoot first, let God sort them out. That's not what you hear when you're off of Twitter, and you were talking about it this weekend.
Well, and I'm worried, actually, the conversation this weekend was how do we take this movement into a real discussion, into real change, into real sort of consulting with different industries to help them not only set up a process for women to go into a safe process if they feel like they've been harassed, but to also set up workplaces where it's prevented and maybe redesign the rules. Yeah, maybe some things don't happen the way they used to. Maybe that is too risky. And I've actually written a blog about it that's on Think with my own thoughts about it. But the bottom line is what's happening now is such an overreach that you're going to have men and women thinking, you know what, I don't want to take the risk. If I have women in my office, they could say anything and there's no due process. We can't, that's not going to work for women. I understand and believing the women. I understand that because in a number of the cases of sexual harassment that have come across this desk, literally, I've spoken to the accusers, I've spoken to the harassers, and I've seen from both sides the same story, and that's why I believe the women. In some of the other cases, I look at both sides of the story and I am uncomfortable with the outcome.
Well,
I am uncomfortable with the man being run out of town.
Which is why we should have due process. And another thing that, Mika, you've told me in talking to other women executives is something that Sam was just saying off camera, that you've heard people saying the whole idea of taking women on business trips.
No, forget it. It'll never happen.
Mika had a top business leader, not only in America, but in the world, say, if this was the environment back when I was 30, starting to move towards management, I would have never been taken on a business trip. I would have never been taken to lunch. I would have never been, whatever.
And she wouldn't be where she is today. And she wouldn't be where she is today.
She said, the guys would, of course, keep going golfing. And it would be patently unfair. Sure. She said, but we as women in industry have to figure out a way to protect our own while making sure it doesn't get in our way of advancement.
Yeah, I mean, we're at a tipping point, right, where you could see one of two paths happen. One is to create a more holistic system where you acknowledge the nuance of these issues and you try to build a structure where you can have due process while expecting the rights and the stories of the accused. And the other is just basically cordoning off. Don't do business trips, don't do the dinners, don't have closed office meetings, all that stuff. And honestly, it's difficult to see which way we go. I think the one not easy, but the one way where we could get to a better place, and it's pretty damn simple, is simply have more women in top-ranking executive positions.
Well, that's happening.
How do we
get there? And it should happen, and it needs to happen more to reflect the actual demographics and dynamics of the society. If we can get there, I think we'll make progress.
Coming up, the Trump judicial nominee who went viral by not knowing the answers to basic legal questions. I actually felt sorry for this guy.
I did too. Felt sorry.
He withdrew his nomination. Oh. It was just not going to happen.
They shouldn't have.
That story ahead, including the My Cousin Vinny connection. Morning Joe's coming right back.